Welcome to Discovering the Law, an educational program for all audiences interested in learning about the law. My name is Attorney Lucy Rivera, and I am your host today. Today, we have a very special program geared towards learning about immigration, specifically from an agency called MABEL. And today with us, we have the co-founders of MABEL, Attorney Jill Seeber, Executive Director, and Attorney Daniel Santiago, also co-founders of MABEL and both attorneys of MABEL. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Jill and Daniel, please tell us a little bit about MABEL.
Sure. So we formed MABEL Center for Immigrant Justice in 2000 during the pandemic, which isn't the greatest time. But we formed the organization and we serve mostly asylum seekers, but we also serve special, like minors, unaccompanied minors, some TPS, but most of our clients are in immigration court and are trying to make their case.
Very interesting. Speaking about immigration court, can you tell us a little bit about what immigration court is and how it's organized?
Yeah, so immigration court is, and it's named court, but it's an agency inside the Department of Justice for the federal government. So they have judges that decide the cases that we see, like asylum and other types of cases as well. But it feels very much like a court, and the stakes are very high for the clients.
And I understand that MABEL focuses on asylum cases. Speaking of asylum, what is asylum? I know there are elements. What are those, please?
Sure. So to make an asylum case, an individual has to show that they have a reasonable, well-founded fear of persecution in their home country if they were to return, and that fear is reasonable both objectively and subjectively, and that the government's unwilling and able to protect them, and that the fear is based on persecution related to a protected ground. And that's where it can be a little trickier. So race, religion, political opinion are some of the grounds for asylum.
And speaking of those elements, would that be what qualifies someone to seek asylum?
So they have the burden, the client has the burden of proof, and also the lawyers, we have the burden of proof of showing that what the harm that they suffered was on account of the protected ground. So we have to provide their testimony, evidence, X-ray reports, country condition reports, sometimes medical evidence about all the harm that they suffered, and the country conditions that they were facing when they were home.
And that can, oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say one of the trickiest parts is to show that the harm, you're kind of asking them to get into the mind of the persecutor and showing that you were harmed and it is tied to the political opinion you hold or some other protected ground.
And that's extremely important. That is one of the issues that we discussed, the evidence. Mm-hmm. How, if these people come from other countries, how do you produce this evidence about for asylum for prosecution, for example?
So it all starts with their testimony and their story. And then we work with them to gather any other documents that can support their claim. For example, affidavits from home country, if they have like some sort of medical evidence that we can provide medical evaluations as well. So it takes a lot of time working with the clients to gather all the evidence because we have the burden of proof in the case. And
some police reports and things like that from home country.
And once you're in immigration court and the people are in this country looking for asylum, who adjudicates the asylum cases?
So in immigration court, there's an immigration judge that the judge hears all the evidence. We are representing the clients, but there's also a DHS attorney that is asking questions to the client about why they should not get asylum in the U.S. What ultimately is the immigration judge that decides, and then if it goes favorable, the case ends there. If not, there's other stages like the BIA, and then even the federal court can weigh in, and there's some other issues on the case.
So let's walk back DHS agent and VIA. For our audience,
Yes.
would you tell us a little bit about
So
that?
DHS is Department of Homeland Security. So they have, those lawyers basically act as prosecutors. And then the BIA is just the Bureau of Immigration Appeals. So it's just another office inside the Department of Justice.
And one thing that's a little bit different about immigration court that people seem surprised to learn is that they're not given an attorney. So a lot of times clients are forced to represent themselves without any legal counsel, even though the government has a DHS attorney arguing against their case.
That's a very interesting point, and this is where MABEL comes in, because you are attorneys that represent your client on a pro bono basis. I do want to discuss that. Let's talk about that a little further ahead. But that's where your services are key in this representation. You also said that there is a deadline, or there are a certain number of years that the people seeking asylum have. Can you talk to us a little bit about that deadline?
Sure. So when an asylum seeker enters the U.S., they have 1 year from the date that they set foot on U.S. soil. And so that can be a point of confusion. A lot of people think it's 1 year from when they arrived in Boston, or some other kind of way to measure it. And so a lot of times when somebody's moving and they're new and they don't speak the language and they're trying to get kids in school, a lot of times we have people come to us that are bumping up against that 1 year deadline. And so we try to help people, even if we can't represent them all the way in court, to at least help them get that application in on time so that they preserve their claim.
That's very interesting and excellent information. Now, you also said that MABEL discusses or takes cases on temporary protective status, TPS. Would you please tell us what that is?
So TPS is people that are granted TPS, is an immigration status that allows the clients to stay in the country usually for a period of 18 months, but that's subject for renewal every 18 months as well. So, for example, right now we're dealing with people that are coming from Haiti, but in the U.S. there's the first TPS after the earthquake in 2010. There was a TPS because the country was destroyed by the earthquake, unfortunately. So now there's people still with that same TPS, 24 years later. So it's temporary, but it gets extended every 18 months. Sometimes it does end, but it's usually you have to show that the country that they designate is back to normal, quote unquote.
For example, like you said, for people that suffered from an earthquake.
Yeah.
But once that circumstances come back to normal, does temporary protective status end?
So the government needs to notify the immigrants that, well, we're ending TPS as of this date. So and there's a commentary period, and people weigh in on the decision, and then they will decide yes or no. But usually, it's not all the countries get back to where they can take away the TPS.
Is there a certain, like in asylum, a year deadline or some sort of limitation?
So there are very strict guidelines for TPS. So whenever they issue a grant of TPS, they say, well, everybody of this nationality that was in the country 3 months ago can apply for TPS and can qualify, and they need to show that. If somebody just got here and they have all the documents necessary, but they were not here, so they won't qualify. And of course, they need to show that they are a citizen of that country, and that there's no other place that they could go other than that country or the U.S.
And the other aspect that you mentioned that MABEL also takes care of are young people, juveniles, special investigations. If you can tell us a little bit about that, about what does that mean and what is that all about?
Sure. So it's Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, so we refer to it a lot as SIJ, and that's for minors. And that can be affected by state law, but the adjudicating body in immigration law says 21 and under. And so first you have to get a judgment in state court, and they have to show that they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or more parents. And so oftentimes, a lot of our clients are coming from Central America or other countries, and they travel here alone, they're unaccompanied, and this is a way in which they can receive status that puts them on the path to a green card and citizenship.
That is a great service that you provide for these children or minors. Now, you said that they have to get a judgment from state court. Tell us a little bit about that.
So they have to go before family and probate, and there's, I don't want to get super technical into it, but they receive a special findings that show that they have been affirmed that they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected, and then the judge issues these special findings that then go into the application that is used for kind of the immigration services. It's, you know, it's kind of showing their status as having kind of suffered neglect or abuse from a parent. It's in their best interest to stay here.
Today we're learning about immigration law and immigration process from an agency called MABEL, and we're learning from the co-founders of this agency, Jill Seeber and Santiago. We're learning about the services that they provide on a pro bono basis. And now we're going to please learn a little bit about MABEL. If you could please tell us, how do people find you?
So we, like the Immigration Court, has a listing of like free legal service providers. And we are one of the providers that are listed in the Boston Court and the Chelmsford Court, which is brand new. And so people usually, after they get the documents from the court, they call us and they say, well, you know, they gave me your number and you're supposed to help me. So then we usually would open an intake with the clients and see what the case is about, and we will discuss it with the other lawyers, attorneys, and then decide if we can take the case or not, or if there's a service that we can provide for the client even if we don't take the case. Sometimes, some of the calls, people are in court, but they are looking for some sort of different reliefs. So we don't provide those services, and so there are other agencies that we refer them to. So that's one way of doing it. But usually after we get the referral, the intake process, we decide which cases we take or not.
And what are some of the criteria that you use to decide whether or not you take the applicants, for example, income or other criteria? What is that?
So yeah, so like the first criteria is that they have to meet income requirements. So they have to be below 150% of the poverty guidelines for the United States. And then so once we decide that they qualify based on income, then we decide based on the facts of the case or the type of claim they have. Sometimes we have cases that are subject to something new in the law, so we want to like discuss it further. So that's something that would be attractive to us. But usually it's a process between all the lawyers and how we decide the cases.
Interesting. So we have 10 minutes left.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's plenty of time to discuss about MABEL. So since we have some time, I would like to see if we can tell us what would be the difference between taking a case completely by MABEL or just doing a service. Like when would be some examples of when you take a case for MABEL?
Sure. So when we take a case for full representation, we help starting with the asylum application and then work permit. We take care of them until their case is heard in immigration court. It's different, and really a lot of it's based on capacity. We would love to take everybody all the way through, but knowing that we can't and people need to preserve their one-year deadline, that's when we do just the applications. But in terms of what it looks like to prepare for a case, about a month before their hearing in front of the judge, we prepare more evidence, we submit that to the court, and then we do a lot of trial prep, prepare them for questions we're asking, the DHS attorney might ask. And so usually we're with some of those clients, 2 to 3 years, and some 6, 7 years. It depends on the docket and how soon their cases are adjudicated.
So in terms of that adjudication, we do have some time. I do want to ask you how MABEL got its name. I also want to know a little bit about if you do your services on a pro bono basis, how do you get compensated for all this extremely important work?
Sure. So we rely on funders a lot, and so we get grants and money from foundations. We have partnerships with community-based organizations and others, and then some generous donors. So in that way, we're able to offer everything that we do for free. And the story of MABEL, you asked about.
Yes, I definitely think that some of these donors need to be listening to you today. But I would love to hear that story because MABEL is the name of a woman. So please tell us about it.
So MABEL is from a Central American country, and she had experienced persecution in her country of origin. And it was at a time where they were starting to hear some cases right along the border in some tent courts, and there was a real problem with access to attorneys. And so we were volunteering with a pro bono project, helping them screen for cases they might take. And when we talked to her on the phone, we just knew it was somebody that we really wanted to help. And so we took her case, and we were so thrilled when she won. So a big part of that time is they were returned to wait in Mexico. And so it was just so joyous, I think, when she won, because she was able to come to the United States and stay. A lot of our clients, you can appeal, and there's other mechanisms in the Boston area, but when kind of for those cases, that sense of urgency was very kind of front and center.
Right, that is a time when people came, but they were returned to the immediate country where not necessarily they were there from there, but they just returned them to that place where they crossed the border.
Yeah, that's where they had court dates, but that's where they would wait until their court dates were called. And so she had a little 6-year-old daughter, I think, or 7, and they were trying to evade danger a lot of the time. So that sense of urgency was there, and she was just a very special and unique woman. So we wanted to keep our services client kind of focused, client-based, and so we thought what better way than to name it after her.
Well, MABEL is a very specialized agency, boutique agency. However, tell us a little bit as to that case of asylum. We have about 6 minutes left, so we can talk a little bit about the process. So walk us through a typical immigration case, through that immigration process, the court and the judge. And I also would like to hear from you as to why do you believe it's important that these clients have representation?
Yeah, so typically the court case feels very much like a trial. There's very little negotiations with the immigration court. Like the judge has to decide on the asylum, yes or no. So the judge has to hear all the evidence that we present, and they have to weigh it carefully, and then they'll make a decision. So, and then there's testimony and there's cross-examination. So it's very, very much like a trial, but it's also compressed into maybe 1 day or half a day. So for the clients, they need to talk about all the harm that they face, all the horrible things they faced in their country once more, and so it's very, very also very difficult for them.
And I think one thing that's important to understand about asylum is there's 2 paths. So we focus primarily today on going through immigration court because MABEL Center does a lot of that work. It's also possible if you came with papers, if you came as a student or a professor, and then you decided it was unsafe to return, you can apply and have an interview with an asylum officer, and there is no attorney on the other side, and you can be represented by an attorney, but we have a very limited role, and it's mostly a conversation between the asylum officer and the asylum seeker.
Interesting. Now, why do you feel, we have like 5 minutes, why do you feel that this population needs representation, and do you feel there is enough representation out there for them?
Well, just to get to the second part first, unfortunately, we don't think there's enough representation for
There's
clients
definitely
based on the need. There's not enough immigration lawyers out there, especially pro bono ones. So there's a lot of need, especially because the government doesn't provide for counsel. So there's a lot of need that is unmet, and that's one of the reasons we also started MABEL Center, was to try to catch as many people in those gaps as we can within our means. But that was one of the founding principles that we had.
In immigration court, the stats are incredible. If you have an immigration attorney, I think you're 5 times more likely to win. So we believe there are a lot of winning good cases that are lost because they don't have, it's a very complicated area of law. And if you don't have someone helping you navigate the legal elements, it's just difficult for them to present it in a way that the judge can see that they qualify. And so yes. I think in that way, and we believe that most of them are likely to be killed or tortured if were not to win their case. So in that way, we feel like the representation is important to help them and their families stay safe.
And Jill, one of our co-founders, and Daniel Santiago are advocating for additional attorneys in that area of the law. Specifically, asylum is what we're referring to, where you just heard one of the co-founders say that it's a winning case, but because there's no attorneys, it's very likely not being able to go through the system. What are some of the takeaways that you would like the public to know?
I would say winning asylum is very difficult, right? And so it's a very challenging process. It's certainly not an easy one. And when somebody's won asylum, you really know that they have been in harm's way. So I think that's one of the important takeaways, and that representation is extremely important. I think those are 2 of the most. I don't know, Daniel, if you...
Well, I would agree with you 100%. It's just very difficult to win asylum, so it's very important to have an attorney walking the client through the process and guide them through the process.
Well, and where can we find the MABEL Center? How do we reach you if somebody wants to talk to you?
Our direct line is 617-417-4325. If somebody's interested in an intake, they can call the number. They can also do WhatsApp. We do use that with all the clients because that's the way they communicate. And also on the internet, mabelcenter.org. You can also make a query in the webpage.
Well, for our audience, today we learned a lot about asylum. We learned about the MABEL Center and its important mission and work and assistance that they provide on a pro bono basis to everyone they find in immigration court. It is difficult to do this work. Funding is required. And this is why we're very grateful to both the co-founders, Jill Seeber and Daniel Santiago.
Thank you for having us.